Crystal,
Not at all.
what are you taking a look at?
Well, guys, another election, another absolutely stunning rejection of the establishment. Now, I've already broken down the French election and the Australian election. Now we move to another corner of the globe, to Colombia, where voters have just unceremoniously tossed out the traditional political class in dramatic fashion. In fact, Federico Gutierrez, the ideological successor to their current right-wing establishment president and the heir to that whole political project that has been dominant in that country for more than 2 decades, that guy did not even make it to the runoff. So in the first round of voting in Colombia, a leftist, Gustavo Petro, was the top vote getter. That in and of itself would be a really surprising turn of events, given that Colombia has elected exclusively right-wing governments for all of its modern history. But the surprises did not end there, because a right-wing populist businessman, Rodolfo Hernandez, virtually unknown until like a few weeks ago, that guy surged ahead of the political establishment pick to make the runoff alongside the leftists. It's as thorough a rejection of the current government and political project as you could possibly get in a country that continues to struggle with cartel violence fueled by our war on drugs, and which has been the U.S.'s most reliable security partner on our various imperial projects on that continent. It also appears to be part of a trend. Now, the surprising rise of the left in Colombia is part of a broader shift to the left in Central and South America. Progressives and leftists have been winning elections across the region, buoyed by millennials focused on inequality, poverty, social justice, and the climate crisis. So, as examples here, Bolivia overwhelmingly elected Luis Arce, the former finance minister under socialist Evo Morales. Peru elected a rural school teacher promising to take on mining interests. Chile elected a former student protest leader on a pledge to tackle inequality and environmental degradation. Lula is back in Brazil and commanding a large double-digit lead right now in the polls over current right-wing President Jair Bolsonaro. In Colombia, the current left surge started with a 2021 mass protest movement sparked by a threatened tax hike and plans to privatize healthcare. It did not help that Colombia suffered with massive COVID outbreaks and also, of course, economic fallout during the pandemic.
Discontent is boiling over in Colombia. At least 24 people are dead after 8 days of protest and a brutal crackdown in that Latin American nation. Now the Interior Minister has come out to say that the government does not condone violence and that any police officer violating the law will be held to account. The demonstrations were sparked by a proposed tax hike that the president has now cancelled, but protesters are not letting up. Colombians are desperate for better lives after COVID made an already dire economic situation even worse. This stunning statistic perhaps puts it into perfect perspective. More than 40% of the population now is living in poverty.
So those protests and the violent, deadly crackdown on those protesters galvanized the left, who lined up behind Gustavo Petro. He's a senator and actually a former low-level member of a guerrilla movement, something that has very much been used against him by the right. He's promising to reform the country's brutally unequal economic system in favor of a jobs guarantee and universal health care. He also ran on fully implementing a landmark peace deal with the Marxist guerrillas of FARC, including promised poverty alleviation for rural Colombia. And in moves that will likely irritate Washington, he has also pledged to revisit Colombia's trade deal with us and to restore relations with Venezuela and to change tax in the war on drugs. And if he was up against the successor to the much-hated incumbent, Petro was looking pretty good to win this whole thing. But the rapid emergence of Rodolfo Hernandez has thrown that outcome into major doubt. So Hernandez is a millionaire construction magnate, former mayor who apparently has a very, very colorful presence on TikTok. He is routinely described as a right-wing populist because he ran aggressively on anti-corruption, but his views are kind of all over the place. So he's apparently opposed to that peace deal with FARC. He's opposed to a higher wealth tax. He defends Colombia's notoriously violent riot police, but he's also pro-choice and anti-fracking. But he also doesn't really seem to have a firm grasp on any particular policy agenda or project. And for all his talk of being against corruption, he himself is under investigation for corruption. So just to give you a taste of his style, here's a little bit of his interaction with the Washington Post in an interview. Quote, Hernandez predicted he would win because his fervent base knows he is, quote, the only one who is capable of removing the thieves from power. He then went on to describe his effect on supporters as messianic and compared to them to the brainwashed hijackers of September 11, 2001, who destroyed the Twin Towers. asked if likening his supporters to terrorists was problematic, he rejected the premise, saying, "What I'm comparing is that after you get into that state, you don't change your position, you don't change it." Okay. This dude literally came out of nowhere to surge right by the powers that be and land in the runoff. And now he has got a very solid chance of winning the presidency, as Gutierrez, the aforementioned right-wing establishment pick who lost in the first round, has already thrown his support behind the surging Hernandez. Economic and political elites in Colombia are absolutely panicked by the idea of a leftist actually rising to power, and they will do whatever it takes to stop Petro's rise. But what has happened already is really extraordinary. Voters in a traditionally quite conservative country have just overwhelmingly opted for a change election, a runoff pitting a former leftist guerrilla ready to challenge their lockstep relationship with the U.S. and reform their economic system, versus a Trump-like drain-the-swamp businessman with a bit of a casual relationship towards basic democratic rules and norms. In a trend that is now thoroughly global, it is just one more country thoroughly disgusted with the status quo and grasping for something, anything different. This one is cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.